to really follow Jesus? I mean, more than just saying I'm Christian or I'm Catholic, like on a survey and you check that box. I mean, more than just going to church on Sunday. I mean, even more than just believing the right things, saying the right things, doing the right things. I mean, even more than just being one of those rah-rah Catholics that loves everything Catholic. They're involved in their parish. They listen to Catholic radio. They do Catholic things. I'm talking about what's happening on the inside. How do I know I'm really following Jesus as a disciple? That's what I want to look at here today. And what I want to do is to bring you in on this. I want to take you all to Rome. Does anyone want to go to Rome with me? We're going to go to Rome, at least visually right now. I want to take you to one of my favorite churches. When I lead pilgrimages to Rome, I love taking people to this little church near the Piazza Navona. It's called the Church of San Luigi, St. Louis. And I love going into this beautiful little Baroque church, not just to admire the church, but for a certain piece of art that's there. We go inside this church and we go to the left side of the main altar, and then there's this little side chapel in there that has 3 depictions from the life of St. Matthew, done by the famous Baroque artist Caravaggio. The one above the altar is an image of Matthew writing his gospel. To the right of the altar is an image of Matthew's martyrdom. But what everybody does, all the tourists, all the pilgrims, they look at the one on the left side, and it's the call of St. Matthew. That moment, that pivotal moment when Jesus walked into the tax collector's office of St. Matthew and called Matthew to leave his life as a tax collector behind and begin to follow him as a disciple. Now, what I want to do is enter into this image here, right? So I want you to picture this scene. I want you to picture this moment where Jesus is stepping into the tax collector's office. On the left side of the painting, there's this window behind Jesus, you can imagine. There's all this light shining behind Jesus, and Jesus is stepping in, and he's pointing to call Matthew. And the idea of the light is the idea of Jesus is the light of the world, and he's stepping into Matthew's darkness, and he's shining light there, and he's calling Matthew out of the darkness into the light to follow him. But what I love is the other side of the painting. With the other side of the painting, it's darker, and you've got Matthew and his tax collector buddies there in the tax collector's office, and these are men that are caught up with themselves. They're not aware of what's going on. They're not aware of Jesus. They're not really aware of other people. They're men that are just caught up in themselves. And so you've got one older man who's kind of leaning over the shoulder of someone else, and he's touching his glasses. It's as if he's looking at all the coins on the table, and he's miserly wondering, how much money did we get today? And then there's another younger man who's sitting there forlorn. He's at the end of the table, and he's got all these coins. And he's just kind of sitting there stroking his coins. He's got all the money in the world, but he's not aware of Jesus. He's not aware of the other people around him. He's just kind of leaning over, looking down at his money. He's got all the wealth in the world, but he's not happy. He's searching for something more, and he's just sitting there kind of like stroking his coins like that. It reminds me of many people today who sit around like this. They sit around and they're like this, just stroking. Not coins, but maybe their screens, their phones, looking down, not aware of others, and searching for something that's going to make them happy, maybe just one more click. Well, all throughout this scene, you've got these other men that are just not aware of Jesus. They're caught up with themselves, but there is one man who does notice. There is one man who does notice that Jesus just walked into the room, and that's Matthew. And I love the look on Matthew's face. Matthew has multiple conflicting emotions all at once in Caravaggio's depiction of this scene. On one hand, you could tell he's just shocked. He's utterly shocked. He's thinking, you're calling me to become a disciple of you? I mean, do you know who I am? I mean, do you know what I do? Do you know what I do on the weekends? I mean, he's kind of like, I'm a tax collector. And in the first century Jewish world, a tax collector wasn't just someone that took the money for the government. He's working for the oppressive Roman government that's oppressing the Jewish people. So he's working for the enemy. And the tax collectors were often known for taking too much off the top for themselves. And so they were viewed as great sinners. So he's a traitor to the Jewish people. He's a great sinner. And he's just shocked. He's saying, you, Jesus, are calling me to be a disciple? You got to be kidding me. Me? But there's also a look on his face where he's kind of intrigued. You can tell he's kind of like thinking about it. You can tell he's actually considering this possibility. He's like, wow, maybe my life would be better if I started to follow Jesus more seriously. Maybe I'd be happier. I wonder if I should do this. Maybe I should change my life a little bit and follow Jesus. Maybe I'll do it. You can tell he's kind of seriously thinking about it. But in that same instant, there's a look of horror. As he's considering the possibilities, like, whoa, hold on a second here. Well, that would be really radical. That would be really scary. There'd be a lot of change. I'd have to, maybe give up my friends and give up this job and give up all this money. I don't know if I want to do that. I think I'll just stay here and hold on to my money bags. And I love this image of Caravaggio at this moment depicting Matthew, because it captures that pivotal moment between Matthew the tax collector and Matthew the disciple. What will Matthew do? Now, I love showing people this image, not just to admire the artistic masterpiece that it is, but I love what it tells us about what it means to be a disciple. Do you sense that ever in your own life, where God is kind of calling you, where he's stepping into your life, where you get kind of sense maybe he's like knocking on the door of your heart, and he's inviting you to follow him more closely? Nothing dramatic, not like you're hearing voices or having apparitions or anything like that, but you just kind of sense, Jesus wants me to give more of my life to him. He wants me to follow him more. He wants me to be more generous. He wants me to serve. He wants me to be more patient. He wants me to make more sacrifices. He wants me to spend more time with him in prayer. Did you ever sense that? Like, do you have that little struggle that Matthew has, where you sense God is inviting you to give up something, to love him more, to serve him more in some way? And there's a part of you that really wants to, but there's another part of you thinking, oh no, that's going to mean a lot of change. I don't know if I want to do that. This gets to the heart of what it means to be a disciple. So what I want to share with you, I want to talk about one key word, one key biblical word that gets right to the heart of what it means to be a disciple. If I had to pick one word from Scripture that sums up the life of a disciple, it would be this word here. It'd be the word imitation. Imitation. I want to talk about this here. So, first of all, the word disciple. What does it mean? So disciple in Greek, mathetes in the New Testament, it means student or learner, but I don't want you to think of it as like a student in a big lecture hall. You show up at some big university and you're in a lecture hall with, 5,000 other people maybe, in this massive lecture hall, and there's a professor up on a stage. You're a student, you're taking notes, and you try to pass an exam. That's the modern experience of what it means to be a student. That's not the first century Jewish understanding of what it means to be a disciple. A disciple follows a teacher, or in Hebrew, the rabbi. And what a rabbi does is he gathers disciples. And he gathers them not to just show up at a class. He's gathering them to come share life with him, to invite them in to share his life. And the goal of the student, the disciple, isn't just to memorize the rabbi's teachings. They do that. Don't get me wrong, that's important. But they do so much more than that. They strive to emulate, to imitate the rabbi's entire way of life. Think about this. When Jesus first called his disciples, remember when he calls Peter and Andrew, maybe for these stories, when they're fishing on the shores of the Sea of Galilee and Jesus calls them. What does he say to them? Does he say, Peter, Andrew, go to the registrar's office and sign up for my classes this week? And he doesn't say that. Or when he goes into Matthew's tax collector's office, does he go to Matthew and say, hey, Matthew, on Wednesday night at 7:30 at the synagogue, I'm going to be giving this great lecture. Come sign up and take this class. That's not what he does. What does he say to Peter, to Andrew, to James, to John, and to Matthew? What does he say to these initial disciples? He says, come follow me. He's inviting them into his life. Follow me. Not just take classes from me, but follow me. He basically is inviting these men to go on a 3-year camping trip with him, to go all around Galilee, and preaching, and they're going to share life with him and share meals together and eat and serve the poor together and study together and pray together. But 3 years, pitching up tents over and over and over again. Now picture that. Have you ever gone camping with someone? You really get to know people when you go camping with them. So this is what Jesus is inviting them to do. And if you can imagine, if you were one of those disciples and you're with Jesus for 3 years, you're certainly going to remember his many great teachings. And maybe you're taking some great mental notes, maybe you're writing notes down, so you certainly got that learning going on. But more than what Jesus taught, more than what Jesus said, probably what Jesus did, the way he lived, is going to rub off on you. You know, Jesus said things like pray, how important it is to pray. And I'm sure you would remember those teachings if you're one of those disciples, but he did so much more than that. He actually went and prayed with them. He'd take them off to a quiet place and go pray. And then every morning he's getting up early and going to his own quiet place and praying with the Father. Sometimes he's spending all night in prayer. What's going to leave more of an impression on you? Jesus' talk about prayer or his own example of constantly going to talk to the Father in his heart in prayer? Jesus gave messages about be merciful, forgive your enemy, love your enemy, forgive. He gave those lessons. But what's probably going to leave such an impression on you is what Jesus said on the cross on Good Friday as he's being crucified by the Romans. He says, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. He taught about forgiveness, but his living forgiveness radically at that pivotal moment in his life is what you're going to remember the most. So the idea is that more is caught than taught. And when you share life with Jesus like this, his way of life rubs off on you. There's a great image that the ancient rabbis used. So the early rabbis had this beautiful image, and they said this: when you find a good rabbi, cover yourself in the dust of the rabbi. And I love that image. The idea is that when you would have a rabbi, the disciples could be seen following their rabbi through the town. So they're walking in the rabbi's footsteps, walking behind him. And what would happen is the dust from the rabbi's feet, the dust from the rabbi's sandals would come up, and you might touch your garments a little bit. When you find a really good rabbi, you want to be so close to him that you want all the dust from that rabbi to come over you and cover you. And it's the idea of imitation, that the rabbi's way of life, it was a nice metaphor to describe how you want the rabbi's way of life to cover you, to change you, and to form you. This is what it means to follow Jesus as a disciple. It's all about imitation. In fact, if you ask Jesus, what does it mean to be a disciple? You know what he says? He says in Luke's gospel, in Luke chapter 6, verse 40, he says, when a disciple is fully trained, he becomes like the teacher himself. That's what the goal is. It's to become like the teacher. That's why St. John Paul II said this. He said, when we're trying to follow Jesus, to really be a disciple, we want to begin to think like him, to love like him, to serve like him, to sacrifice like him, to forgive like him. We want to take on the mind and the heart of Christ. That's what it means to be a disciple, which is so much more than just getting the right answers on a quiz. I'm Orthodox. I believe all the right things. Absolutely essential to do that. But Jesus is inviting us to do so much more. He wants us to live like him. And there's another great passage that St. Paul writes about. St. Paul, when he was discipling the Christians in Corinth, and he summed up what he wanted them to do, he said, be imitators of me as I am of Christ. Imitate my life to the extent that I'm imitating Jesus. You see this idea of imitation? This is at the very heart of what it means to be a disciple. Now, when I ask the question that I pose to all of you, what does it mean to really follow Jesus? How do I really know I'm on the right path? Am I really following Jesus on the inside? Am I following him? How do I know I'm growing in holiness? Do you ever hear Christians talk about that? How important it is to grow in holiness. And there's this universal call to holiness. We're all called to holiness. We're supposed to pursue sanctity. Catholics use this kind of language, but it just seems kind of ethereal way up here. I mean, wouldn't it be really cool if there was like a holiness thermometer you could take each week? You can kind of go like this and go, oh, good, I grew in 15 degrees of holiness. I'm on the right path. Awesome. Wouldn't it be good to do that? Well, guess what? There isn't a holiness thermometer, but if you want a gauge, if you want to know, am I really on the right path? What question do you want to ask? You want to ask, am I imitating Jesus? How well am I imitating Jesus in my marriage? Do I love and serve my spouse? Do I anticipate my spouse's needs? Am I patient with my spouse? Do I forgive my spouse like Jesus would? Do I live this kind of Christ-like love with my children, with my friends, with my roommate, with my coworkers? Do I serve the poor, serve those in need? How much am I really imitating Jesus? That's the question. And I think the challenge that we face today in our world especially is that there are many people who identify as Catholics. Again, they get the right answer on a survey, and maybe they show up at church every Sunday. Maybe they put money in the basket. So they say and do the right things, but interiorly, are they really striving to imitate Christ in their life? They go through all the motions with their faith, but is there a motion inside of striving to imitate Jesus? You know, Pope Francis was very concerned at the very beginning of his pontificate. He was concerned about how there are many people out there, again, that identify as Christian, identify as Catholic, but aren't seeking to follow Christ as a disciple. You know, he's concerned that there are too many mediocre Christians. I would maybe say it this way, that there are too many Chicago Cubs Catholics. Now, I'm from Chicago. I was a North Sider. I lived on the north side of Chicago, close to Wrigley Field. I am a Cubs fan. I am a die-hard Cubs fan. And what I mean by that is there's a lot of dying and it's really hard to be a Cubs fan. Being a Cubs fan is very Catholic, right? Because there's a lot of suffering involved, a rich theology of suffering. The only difference is Catholic suffering, you know, following Jesus is redemptive. There's some good that can come out of it. Cubs suffering is just pointless. It's just suffering. Now, I know you're all thinking, well, they won the World Series recently, Dr. Shree, and that's true, but as a Cubs fan, I'm going to have to wait 108 more years, you know, before they win the next one, you know. So I remember as a kid growing up watching the Cubs. You know, it was like just horrible season after horrible season after horrible season. Then every once in a while, we got to 500. We won half our games. It's like, wow, we feel pretty good about ourselves. We had 500. That's respectable. And then maybe once every 10 or 12 years, we make it to the playoffs. Wow, we're in the playoffs. Awesome. But the idea of winning the World Series, oh no, that's for only the really good teams like the Yankees or something. That was the attitude of a Cubs fan, right? And I think that's the attitude of many Catholics. That we kind of think like, yeah, I go to church on Sunday and I volunteer and I give a little money to the church and, you know, and I really believe and, you know, that's pretty good. You know, so I'm doing okay. I feel pretty good about myself, you know. But to strive to imitate Jesus and to be a saint, no, that's only for like the Mother Teresas of this world, you know, or that's only for the St. John Paul IIs of this world. You know, there's one of the really holy people over there. No. You know, you could be thinking, you know, how can I possibly strive that? I'm just an ordinary Catholic in pew number 16. You know, I show up at the same spot here at church, and I am there, but greatness is not for me. What we want to see is this call to be a disciple, to imitate Jesus, is for everyone. And I want to bring you in on this now. Ready? So if you don't remember anything else from this first session, what we do next is getting right at the vision for what it means to follow Jesus as a disciple. And to do this, I want to take you to another great city in Europe. So we've been to Rome. We saw Caravaggio's painting. I want to take you to London now. And here's my question. How many of you have been to London? Any of you been to London? So in London, have you been down in the subway system in London? You know, the tube, the underground? It's fascinating. When you go down into the tube, you go down the metro system in London, they've got these big signs everywhere that are just kind of funny to me. I don't know. I've been on subways in Rome, Paris, Washington, D.C., New York, Thailand. I mean, I've been on many, many different kind of subway systems, and I've never seen these kinds of signs all over the place. When you go down into the tube, you go down the underground in London, there's these signs, and they say these three words. What are those three words? Mind the gap. Mind the gap. And then on the speaker, you hear those words, mind the gap, mind the gap, mind the gap. Now, what is it talking about? It's talking about the gap from the platform where you're standing waiting for the train to come by, and then the train comes in, and then there's a gap between the platform and the train. And so they tell you to mind the gap because if you don't mind the gap, what's going to happen? You're going to fall. You know, so I understand that there's a gap there, but I don't know why they're really nervous about the gap in London. There's something really dangerous there. But anyway, but this idea of mind the gap. Here's my question for you. Do you mind the gap in your life? Do you mind the gap in your spiritual life? Do you mind the gaps in your friendships, in your dating relationships, in your marriages? In other words, as a Christian, do I mind the gap? Let's just take my relationship with God first. Do I mind the gaps I have in my prayer life? Like I pray, but not that consistently. Do I mind the gaps in my moral life? You know, I'm a good person. I don't kill people. I don't rob banks. That's what many people say. I must be doing okay. But do I imitate Jesus? Are there areas where I lose my temper with my kids? Or I worry too much about what other people think of me? Or I'm proud and I always think my way is better? Or I'm self-centered. I'm always wanting to do what I want. So whenever I'm with my friends, I'm always kind of angling to try to, like, can we do this thing for myself? I'm always thinking about me, or I hold grudges against others. Do I do it? In other words, am I aware of the gaps in my character, in my moral character, my lack of virtue? Am I aware of the gaps in my marriage? Areas where I fall short and I don't love my wife as well as I should. I really do love her, but am I aware of how maybe I'm not as thoughtful in thinking through, what does she need today? How can I serve her? Because I'm so caught up with what I'm doing and I need to ask her to help me with my thing, but I'm not actually thinking about it. Do I notice that gap in my life? Or do I fail sometimes to thank her and to honor her? And because I get so busy and I can take her for granted. Do I sometimes in my words not treat her as well as I should? Am I aware of the gaps in my marriage? Or am I just kind of, I'm coasting, well, I'm married and we're not divorced, so I guess it's okay, so it's all fine. No, am I aware? Am I trying to make my marriage better? Am I trying to be a better father to my kids? I don't beat them and, I don't psychologically abuse them, but am I present to them? Am I thinking through, what does this child need in my life? Am I aware of the gaps in my family life? Am I aware of the gaps in my friendships? Am I aware of the gaps in my relationship with God? A true disciple doesn't just go through the motions in life, whether it's in church, in the workplace, or in the home. That's not the heart of a disciple. A true disciple is constantly seeking to imitate Jesus more, to radiate Christ's love more everywhere he goes, so that in every situation, people encounter more and more of Jesus in me than just me and my faults and my weaknesses and my self-centeredness. Am I aware of those gaps? So here are the two basic questions that every disciple must ask. Two basic questions every disciple must ask. The first one, what am I made for? Am I aware of what I'm made for? I am made for greatness. I'm not made to be a Chicago Cubs Catholic, a mediocre Catholic, a Catholic that just goes through the motions. Yes, I believe the right things and do the right things, but more than that, Jesus wants to change me. He wants me to become like him. I'm made to be perfect as the Heavenly Father is perfect, Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount. I'm meant to be transformed into Christ's likeness from one degree of glory to another. That's what I'm made for. Have any of you reached that perfection yet? Most of us know that's what we're made for, but I'm not there yet. That's why there's the second question. Where am I right now? The truth about myself. This is where I am. I've got some good qualities. I really do love God. God's important to me, and I do love my family and the other people in my life. I want to be a good person. So there's some noble qualities in me, but I know that I fall short. I know I have many gaps. I don't pray as consistently as I should. And even when I show up, maybe my mind is not as attentive, or my heart's not fully in it. I know that I can get frustrated really easily, or I can get discouraged really easily in life and get very melancholic and sad and lose hope in life that God's really there to help me, or I can be prideful. I know I got all these gaps in my life. Good qualities, but I fall short. How do I get from where I am now to where Jesus wants me to be? That, my friends, is the journey of discipleship. That is what discipleship is all about. So in closing, I want to share with you one last little analogy to tie a bow on all this here. And I'm going to share with you something you may not be aware of. Imagine if I told you I'm a great basketball player. Imagine if I just told you that I am an amazing basketball player. I'm really one of the best basketball players that exist in the world. If I told you that, you'd say, wow, Dr. Sri, I didn't know that about you. But what is it that makes you such a great basketball player? And I told you, I'm really, really good at following all the rules. I'm an amazing basketball player. I follow the rules perfectly. I never go out of bounds. I never double dribble. I never travel with the basketball. I mean, I'm amazing. I mean, Steph Curry, really, he needs me on his team. You'd all be laughing and mocking me, as you should, because you know that while following the rules is essential, right? It's important to follow the rules, right? But that's just the basics. That's just permission to play. To be a great basketball player involves more than just following the rules. If I don't have the skills of dribbling and shooting and passing and blocking out, I'm never going to be a great basketball player no matter how carefully I follow all the rules. The same is true in our life with God as a disciple. Is it essential to follow the rules that Jesus gives us, his commandments, his teachings? Absolutely. But that doesn't make you a great Catholic. It's essential. I hope I'm clear on that, right? You absolutely have to follow the rules. You have to believe what Jesus teaches, the church teaches, and follow that, absolutely. It's just that Jesus, that's just the basics. He's calling us to be great disciples, to follow him. He's calling us to love more. You know, sometimes we as Catholics, we can pat ourselves on the back and think, hey, I believe in God. I mean, a lot of people don't even believe in God. I stand out, and I go to church every Sunday. I even go on holy days of obligation. I mean, wow, I'm really in the top tier. And not only that, I believe all the church's teachings, even all those tough moral issues. You know, I believe the church's teachings on the importance of care for the poor, the church's teachings on pro-life, the church's teachings on immigration, the church's teachings on the definition of marriage. I believe all those things, and you can pat yourself on the back. Man, I'm an amazing Catholic. Wow, I'm in like the 99th percentile. No, don't get me wrong. It's absolutely essential to believe all those things, but that does not make us a great Catholic, a great disciple. That's just following the rules. Permission to play, absolutely essential. The bigger question is in your heart. Are you surrendering your heart more to God? Are you loving him more? Are you allowing God to change you, to transform you, to make you more like him? What we're going to be looking at in these sessions together is that whole walk as a disciple. How can I encounter Jesus, experience that real change in my life? How do I get from where I've been to where God wants me to be? That's the journey of the disciple, and that's what we're going to look at in the next session.